When a routine evening walk turns into a career-ending conspiracy, a corrupt police officer's worst assumptions collide with a truth that will destroy everything he thought he controlled. His target? The man who holds the power to send him to federal prison. The autumn air in downtown Richmond, Virginia carried the crisp promise of change. As Marcus Washington stepped out of his townhouse for his nightly walk, at 45, Marcus had maintained the disciplined routine he'd developed during his years as a federal prosecutor. 30 minutes of walking each evening to clear his mind and process the complex cases that filled his days at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Marcus dressed simply for these walks. Dark jeans, a plain hoodie, and comfortable sneakers. To anyone watching, he appeared to be just another resident, taking an evening stroll through the historic Fan District. What they couldn't see was the brilliant legal mind that had secured convictions against some of the most dangerous criminals in Virginia, or the federal badge that rested in his wallet, representing 15 years of unwavering dedication to justice. Tonight, Marcus was particularly reflective. He had spent the day reviewing evidence in a case that would define his career, a federal investigation into police corruption that had tentacles reaching into multiple Virginia law enforcement agencies. The case, which had been building for 2 years, centered around a network of officers who had been planting evidence, falsifying reports, and destroying the lives of innocent citizens for personal gain and career advancement. As Marcus walked past the elegant Victorian homes that lined Monument Avenue, he thought about the victims whose stories had driven him to pursue this case with relentless determination. Families torn apart by false arrests, young people whose futures had been derailed by fabricated charges, and communities that had lost trust in the very people sworn to protect them. What Marcus didn't know was that he was being watched. Officer Derek Hamilton sat in his patrol car 3 blocks away, his eyes fixed on the figure walking alone under the streetlights. At 37, Hamilton was everything that was wrong with modern policing: corrupt, prejudiced, and absolutely convinced that his badge made him untouchable. He had built his reputation on high arrest numbers, and he wasn't particularly concerned about whether those arrests were legitimate. Hamilton had received a tip earlier that evening, an anonymous call suggesting that a drug deal would be taking place in the Fan District around. Of course, there had been no such tip. Hamilton had made the call himself from a burner phone, creating the documentation he would need to justify what he was about to do. For weeks, Hamilton had been feeling the pressure of increased scrutiny from his supervisors. Questions were being asked about his arrest patterns, his use of force reports, and his unusually high rate of drug seizures. He needed a significant bust to deflect attention, and he had learned long ago that the easiest targets were people who looked like Marcus Washington. Hamilton had refined his technique over the years: plant evidence, claim probable cause, make the arrest, and let the system do the rest. Most victims couldn't afford decent lawyers, and even those who could found it difficult to prove their innocence against the word of a police officer. It was a system that had worked perfectly for Hamilton until tonight. As Marcus turned onto a quieter residential street lined with old oak trees, Hamilton made his move. He activated his patrol car's emergency lights and slowly pulled up behind the walking figure. Marcus heard the car before he saw the lights. He turned around, unsurprised but cautious. In his years as a federal prosecutor, he had learned to read situations quickly, and something about this stop felt different from a routine police interaction. "Evening," Hamilton called out as he stepped from his patrol car, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the officer, his hands visible and his demeanor calm. "Good evening, officer. Is there something I can help you with?" Hamilton approached with the swagger of someone who believed he controlled the situation. "I've received reports of suspicious activity in this area. Drug deals, that sort of thing. I need to search you for weapons and contraband." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What specifically made you stop me?" "I'm just taking a walk in my own neighborhood. Let's just say you fit the description of someone we're looking for," Hamilton replied, his tone carrying the casual racism that he had learned to disguise as police work. Marcus remained calm, though every instinct honed by years of prosecuting corrupt officials was now alerting him to what was happening. "I see. And what description would that be? Hamilton didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space in a clear attempt at intimidation. I'm going to need you to put your hands on the wall and spread your legs. Officer, I haven't committed any crime and I don't consent to a search, Marcus said evenly. If you have probable cause, please state it clearly. Hamilton's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to articulate resistance, and Marcus's calm professionalism was throwing off his usual script. I don't need your consent. Turn around now, or I'll add resisting arrest to your charges. Marcus complied with the order, placing his hands against the brick wall of a nearby building, while Hamilton conducted an aggressive pat-down. What Marcus didn't see was Hamilton palming a small baggie of white powder that he had prepared earlier in the evening. Well, well, what do we have here? Hamilton announced loudly, pulling the planted drugs from Marcus's hoodie pocket with theatrical surprise. Looks like my tip was accurate. Marcus turned around slowly, his expression shifting from caution to the cold, analytical focus that had made him one of the most effective prosecutors in the federal system. Officer, I need to see your badge number and get your name for the record. Hamilton smirked, pulling out his handcuffs. You're in no position to be making demands. You're under arrest for possession of controlled substances. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus said quietly, Officer Hamilton, I'm going to remember this moment very clearly. Every detail, every word you've said, every procedure you violated. Hamilton's confidence faltered slightly at the use of his name, but he pushed forward. Save it for your lawyer, if you can afford one. The booking process at the Richmond Police Department was a masterclass in systemic prejudice. Hamilton had perfected the art of creating a narrative that would be difficult to challenge. His report would claim that he had observed suspicious behavior, approached to investigate, and discovered drugs during a lawful search incident to arrest. Marcus was processed through the system with the same indifference shown to countless other victims of Hamilton's corruption. His one phone call was to his wife, Dr. Sarah Washington, a professor of criminal justice at Virginia Commonwealth University. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully, Marcus said when she answered. I've been arrested on fabricated charges. The officer planted evidence. I need you to contact federal oversight and document everything. Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Marcus, what happened? I'll explain everything later. Right now, I need you to start making calls. This goes beyond just my case. This is about a pattern of corruption that we've been investigating. What neither Hamilton nor the local prosecutors knew was that Marcus's arrest had triggered a series of protocols that had been put in place specifically for situations like this. Within hours of his booking, federal agents were reviewing security footage from the area, conducting background checks on Officer Hamilton, and preparing for what would become one of the most significant police corruption cases in Virginia's history. 3 days later, Marcus sat in his federal courthouse office, reviewing the evidence that had been gathered since his arrest. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was preparing to prosecute his own case, and Hamilton had unknowingly provided him with the final piece of evidence needed to bring down the entire corruption network. Sarah knocked on his office door and entered with a concerned expression. How are you holding up? Marcus looked up from the files spread across his desk. Honestly, this might be the best thing that could have happened to our investigation. Hamilton just gave us everything we need to expose the whole system. The federal grand jury convened the following week in a secure courtroom at the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Marcus had recused himself from directly prosecuting his own case, but as the lead prosecutor on the broader corruption investigation, he would be presenting evidence that included his own arrest. Hamilton sat in the defendant's chair, no longer wearing the uniform that had given him such confidence. His lawyer, an overwhelmed public defender, shuffled through papers while Hamilton stared at the prosecution table with growing unease. That's when Marcus walked into the courtroom. Hamilton's face went through a remarkable transformation as recognition dawned. The confident smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of pure terror, as he realized that the drug dealer he had arrested was not only a federal prosecutor, but the lead investigator on the case that would determine his fate. Your Honor, Marcus announced to the court, I am Marcus Washington, Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. While I have recused myself from directly prosecuting my own arrest, I am here to present evidence in the broader federal investigation into police corruption that includes defendant Hamilton's actions. Hamilton's lawyer requested an immediate recess, but the damage was already done. The defendant, who had been so confident in his ability to manipulate the system, was now facing the reality that he had chosen the worst possible victim for his corruption. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus presented a meticulously documented case that went far beyond his own arrest. Security footage showed Hamilton palming the evidence before conducting the search. Financial records revealed suspicious patterns in his arrest reports. Testimony from other victims established a clear pattern of evidence planting and false arrest. But the most damaging evidence was Hamilton's own body camera footage, which he had forgotten to turn off after Marcus's arrest. The recording captured him bragging to a fellow officer about how easy it was to take down people who don't know their place. The defendant believed he was above the law, Marcus told the grand jury. He chose his victims based on the assumption that they would be powerless to fight back. But justice doesn't recognize his assumptions, and neither does this court. Hamilton's conviction was swift and decisive. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. But more importantly, his case opened the floodgates for other victims to come forward. In the months that followed, 17 other officers were indicted in connection with the corruption network. Hundreds of cases were reviewed and overturned. Families that had been torn apart by false arrests were reunited, and a community began to heal from years of systemic abuse. Marcus returned to his evening walks, but now they carried a different meaning. He walked not just for personal reflection, but as a visible reminder that justice could prevail even in the darkest corners of corruption. 6 months after Hamilton's conviction, Marcus received a letter from a young law student who had been following the case. "Mr. Washington," it read, "your willingness to turn your own victimization into a catalyst for systemic change has inspired me to dedicate my career to civil rights law. Thank you for showing that the pursuit of justice doesn't stop, even when the system fails us personally." Marcus kept that letter in his desk drawer, next to a photo from the community celebration that had been held to honor the victims of police corruption. It reminded him that sometimes the most important victories come not from the cases we choose, but from the moments when we choose to stand up to injustice, regardless of the personal cost. The Hamilton case became a landmark in federal civil rights prosecution, cited in law schools and police academies across the country. But for Marcus, it remained a personal reminder that the fight for justice is never finished, and that sometimes the system's greatest enemy can become its most powerful reformer. As he often told young prosecutors who joined his office, the badge doesn't make someone above the law, it makes them accountable to it. And when officers forget that truth, we're here to remind them. The ripple effects of the Hamilton case extended far beyond Virginia's borders. Federal prosecutors across the country began implementing new protocols for investigating police corruption, using Marcus's case as a template for how to turn individual victimization into systemic reform. 2 years after Hamilton's conviction, Marcus was invited to speak at the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers conference. His presentation, titled "When the Victim Becomes the Prosecutor," drew standing ovations and sparked nationwide discussions about police accountability. "The most dangerous assumption in law enforcement," Marcus told the audience of defense attorneys, "is that corruption only affects those without power. When officers choose their victims based on perceived powerlessness, they're not just committing crimes, they're revealing the fundamental flaw in a system that allows such assumptions to exist." Following his presentation, Marcus was approached by Detective Maria Rodriguez from the Los Angeles Police Department. She had traveled across the country specifically to meet him. "Mr. Washington," she said, "I've been fighting corruption in my own department for years. Your case gave me the courage to speak up about what I've been witnessing. We're starting a federal investigation based on your model." Marcus spent an hour with Detective Rodriguez, sharing strategies and connecting her with federal resources. It was conversations like these that reminded him why the Hamilton case had been so important, not just for the immediate victims, but for the broader movement toward police accountability. 6 months later, Detective Rodriguez's investigation resulted in the largest police corruption bust in Los Angeles history. When reporters asked her about her inspiration, She credited Marcus's case as the catalyst that showed her how to turn individual experiences of corruption into systemic change. Meanwhile, Hamilton's conviction had created an unexpected consequence within the Richmond Police Department. Officers who had previously remained silent about misconduct began coming forward, knowing that the federal government was serious about prosecuting corruption. Officer Jennifer Chen, a 15-year veteran, requested a meeting with Marcus 3 years after the Hamilton trial. She sat across from him in his office, nervously twisting her wedding ring. "I witnessed Hamilton planting evidence on 3 other occasions," she confessed. "I should have reported it, but I was afraid for my career, my family's livelihood. Seeing how you handled your case, I can't stay silent anymore." Marcus listened carefully as Officer Chen detailed the incidents she had witnessed. Her testimony would eventually lead to the exoneration of 5 additional individuals who had been falsely convicted based on Hamilton's fabricated evidence. "Your courage now doesn't erase the past," Marcus told her, "but it can prevent future injustices. That's what matters." Officer Chen's testimony became part of a larger pattern. Over the following year, 7 more officers came forward with information about corruption they had witnessed but never reported. The culture of silence that had protected officers like Hamilton was finally beginning to crack. The most significant long-term impact came from the Hamilton case's influence on police training programs. The FBI Law Enforcement Academy began using Marcus's case as a mandatory training module for new recruits, emphasizing that corruption could target anyone, including those with the power to prosecute. During one training session, a young recruit raised his hand. "Sir, what if Hamilton had chosen a different victim? Someone who couldn't fight back?" Marcus, who was guest lecturing that day, paused thoughtfully. "That's exactly the point. Hamilton didn't just make a mistake in choosing me, he made a mistake in thinking that anyone deserves to be victimized by corrupt policing. Justice shouldn't depend on who you are or what position you hold." The recruit's question led to a broader discussion about systemic reform and the importance of protecting all citizens regardless of their social or economic status. These conversations were happening in police academies across the country, slowly changing the culture of law enforcement from within. 5 years after his arrest, Marcus established the Civil Rights Accountability Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of police corruption. The foundation provided legal resources, connected victims with federal prosecutors, and created a national database of corruption cases. The foundation's first major case involved a teenage girl from rural Mississippi who had been framed by a local sheriff. With the foundation's support, her case reached federal court, resulting in not only her exoneration, but also the prosecution of 3 officers and a complete overhaul of the county's law enforcement practices. "Every case we take on honors the principle that corruption thrives when it targets the vulnerable," Marcus explained to a reporter covering the foundation's work. "By ensuring that every victim has access to justice, we're creating a system where corruption can't hide behind assumptions about powerlessness." The foundation's work attracted national attention when it successfully prosecuted a case involving the wrongful conviction of an entire family based on fabricated drug charges. The case, which had similarities to Marcus's own experience, resulted in a $50 million settlement and criminal convictions for 6 officers. As Marcus reflected on the journey from his own arrest to the establishment of the foundation, he realized that Hamilton's corruption had ultimately become the catalyst for one of the most significant civil rights initiatives of the decade. The evening walks that had started this journey continued to be an important part of Marcus's routine. But now, as he walked through the same Richmond neighborhood where he had been arrested, he often encountered community members who wanted to thank him for his work. Miss Eleanor Thompson, an elderly Wellman who lived on Monument Avenue, made it a point to greet Marcus during his evening walks. "You turned something terrible into something beautiful," she told him one evening. "My grandson is studying law because of your example." These personal connections reminded Marcus that the impact of fighting corruption extended beyond courtrooms and policy changes. It was about restoring faith in justice and inspiring the next generation to believe that the system could work for everyone. 10 years after the Hamilton case, Marcus was appointed as a federal judge, becoming one of the youngest jurists ever elevated to the federal bench. His confirmation hearing was attended by dozens of victims whose lives had been changed by his work on police corruption cases. During his confirmation testimony, Marcus was asked about his philosophy on justice. "Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing," he responded. "It's about creating systems that prevent injustice from occurring in the first place. My experience taught me that sometimes the most important cases are the ones that happen to us personally, because they give us the motivation and insight to fight for systemic change." From his new position on the federal bench, Marcus continued to be a powerful voice for police accountability and civil rights. His court became known for its fair but firm approach to corruption cases, and his decisions were frequently cited by other federal judges across the country. The Hamilton case had come full circle from a corrupt officer's attempt to destroy an innocent man's life to a landmark that would protect countless others from similar abuse. It proved that sometimes the greatest victories emerge from the darkest moments, and that the pursuit of justice can transform not just individual lives, but entire systems of power. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Justice isn't just about prosecuting criminals. It's about ensuring that those who abuse their authority face the same accountability they demand from others. Subscribe to Black Story Life for more stories that remind us that no one is above the law, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is simply refusing to be its victim.